All right, we're going to begin our discussion this evening. Okay, ready? All right. A very good evening again, sisters and brothers. I'm very honored to be again invited by the Buddhist Fellowship to be here to share some of my readings. Actually, what I'm trying to do tonight is to share a book that I've read, and I thought that, you know, if you read a book that is good, it's always right to share with everybody. All right, and this book is, in particular, is called Human-Centered Buddhism. Now, before I start to discuss about the book and what its implication, what implication it has for us, I would want to first urge all of you to listen to what I'm going to say with a very open mind, very, very open mind. I like all of you to put yourself in a non-sectarian position. If you happen to be practicing certain schools of Buddhism, we belong to certain schools of Buddhism, whether you are Pure Land or Zen or Theravada or Mahayana or Vajrayana, for the next 1.5 hours, I would want all of you to just put that aside, just with the open mind, very, very open mind, to listen to what I have to say about this book, because the subject can be very sensitive. But before I go into the discussion, the whole purpose of my proposing this discussion tonight is not to make judgment on any particular schools of Buddhism, but rather to share the wisdom of the author of the book, which is Venerable Master In Shun, on how to understand the evolution of Buddhism when it was original Buddhism during the time of the Buddha, and then over the 2,500 years of the history of Buddhism, how it have evolved into different schools, different practices, and then try to understand them, to understand the changes that the time and the circumstances that brought about those changes. That is the objective. And having done so, then we are able to make our own analysis of the different various schools. Because one of the problem, I'm sure, sisters and brothers, all of you who have been in the Buddhist community for quite some time, I'm sure you always encounter with this question. Two questions. One is, which school of Buddhism is best for me? You always have this question, should I practice this school or that school? That's always a very difficult question to answer, depending on your personal disposition. The second question that we always come across is that when we look at the actual practices that we observe in the Buddhist community today, worldwide, I'm not talking about Singapore only, worldwide, you sometimes wonder, and assuming that you have read something about the Buddha's teaching in the early days, you wonder, why is there a big gap, a big difference between what the Buddha taught and what we see as the actual practice here today in the Buddhist community. And this is something that I'm sure goes back into your mind. All right. So I hope that with this discussion this evening, going through the book, we will be able to come up with some answers. All right. But very important, please, with an open mind. Okay. With an open mind. Okay, the author of the book is known as Venerable Master In Shun. Of course, he has passed away actually a few years ago. He passed away, by the way, at the age of 101. 101. And he's a Mahayana venerable, Mahayana, in the Mahayana school, and he's known as a scholar monk because he wrote a lot of books. And the great thing about Venerable Master Ing Soon is that he belongs to no particular sect. Although he's a Mahayana monk, but he advocated the study, serious study of the Theravadan Nikayas, the Agamas, they call it, the Nikayas. And because he felt that very strongly that without Theravada, without Theravadan school, there can never be Mahayana. Because the origin of all Buddhist teaching goes back to the days of the Buddha. And the Buddha has no yana except his Buddha yana. Yeah, the Buddha has never came up with any school. He just simply teach what he discovered. The term Theravada and Mahayana was later development. When people have differences in opinion, they form their own form their own groups, and then they call themselves this and that, and then of course at one time the Mahayana used to call the people who practice early Buddhism as Hinayana, which is very degradatory, looking down on them, which is, according to Venerable Master Ing Soon, is the worst thing to do. The worst thing to look down on the Theravadins, or by calling them Hinayana. That's not, the Mahayana used to do that. And I think these days they don't do it anymore. They call them Theravada. Yeah, the school of the elders, the teaching. Yeah, because they have to realize that without the early teaching, there's no Mahayana. So just read that on the slide. A quick bio of the Venerable. Now you notice that he was born 1905, he passed away 2005, actually 100 years, but in Chinese, way of looking at 101 years. And he basically is a Mahayana monk, and he advocated the idea of human-centered Buddhism. I explained human-centered Buddhism later on, as opposed to humanistic Buddhism, because I'm sure among some of you must have heard humanistic Buddhism, the term humanistic Buddhism, quite a number of times, or very common these days. But there's a difference. I'll explain that. But what I wanted to point out here is that his work also generated the interest in the long not Agamas, the Nikayas, which is the Theravadan teaching, and even teachers like Theravadan teachers, famous Theravadan teachers like Bhikkhu Bodhi, actually endorse what Venerable Master Ing Soon wrote in the book. And very importantly, he has been very influential, Venerable Master Ing Soon has been very influential on the thinking of some of the famous venerables in Taiwan, mainly in Taiwan, because he resides in Taiwan. Ever since China fell to communism, he went over to Taiwan, so he resides in Taiwan. And he has a lot of influence over Venerable Zheng Yan, which is the founder of the Tzu movement. They do a lot of humanitarian work. In fact, she's very heavily influenced by Venerable Master Ing Soon. Also, you'll be surprised that Venerable Sun Yuan of the Dharma Drum, another big group in Taiwan, also was quite influenced by the thinking and the thoughts of Venerable Ing Soon. And so is the Venerable Xing Yin of Fo Guang Shan. Yeah? So can you imagine the three big groups in Taiwan, Tzu Chi, Fo Guang Shan, and Fo Guang Shan Dharma Drum, are basically very much influenced by the thoughts and writings of Venerable Ing Soon. So he has been sort of seen as a mentor. All right? Sorry. Okay. What actually motivated Venerable Master Ing Soon to write this book? and research into the source of the Buddha's teaching. To quote from part of the book, this is what he said: the enormous gap between the Buddha's teaching and the actual practices in the Buddhist community has been an issue I have grappled with all along. After 8 years of study since my renunciation, I realized that even though the Buddha's teaching has been distorted by Chinese culture in no small extent, this gradual degeneration of the purity of the Dharma has begun long ago in India, and the deterioration severely worsened as Indian Buddhism was reaching its end. Now let me explain here a little. Venerable In Sun happened to live in China during the period of the last period of the Qing dynasty, in China, before it became a republic with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the revolution, and became a republic. During that period, the 20-30 years period, Buddhism in China was so bad. The image was so bad. Monks were doing nothing else but chanting for the dead. There were no education. There were no, organization like this. The Buddhism in China was at its lowest image, and I think that, and he renounced and became the Buddhist monk. And when he looked into the early teaching of the Buddha, the sutras, he was so shocked, that what he saw then in China, the practices in the Buddhist community were completely different from what he read in the sutras or in the teaching of the Buddha. That prompted him to go further and look into the source of the Buddhist teaching. All right. So this is one of the first motivation. Okay. Then further than that, he researched into Indian Buddhism, the Buddhism of India, and it makes sense because Buddhism came from India. So if you want to trace the source, you go all the way back to where the teaching came from, which is India. So, and the quote one again, the part of the book, it says that the intimacy, the genuineness, the simplicity, and the so true to life of the Buddha's original teaching, as found in the Agama Sutra, which are actually the Nikayas, are quite unlike the display of faith and idealistic visions found in many of the Mahayana scriptures. This led me to the profound conviction that Buddhism is about the Buddha among mankind and is centered on human beings. What he's trying to say is, as he was going through reading the sutras and all that, in fact, just now Brother Yutong was telling me that it was recorded that during the part when he was a monk, he devoted so much time into reading all the, the sutras, all the 3 baskets of sutras, and he spent the first few years of his manhood just doing that, just to read up, and when he read up, and he realizes that the original teaching of the Buddha is so true to life, so simplistic, and then he started looking at some of the Mahayana sutras, all the mystical, very mystical, very imaginative description that you found in a lot of the Mahayana sutras. He realizes something is wrong somewhere. So that's why that led him to want to go further into researching the source of Indian Buddhism and what happens to Buddhism in India, what causes all these changes. But he's very, very convinced by his reading of the early teaching of the Buddha that Buddhism, the teaching of the Buddha, is about human being, and the Buddha being born in the human realm, and therefore he is very committed to the search for the source of the teaching of the Buddha, to try to uncover, what actually has caused the so much deviation, so much changes. Okay. Yeah, I want to show you this. This is not from his book, but it's from me. I wanted to share with you. Some of you who read the life story of the Buddha, I'm sure you come across this part, which is called the Dona Sutra. And what happened was that after the Buddha was enlightened, he was confronted by some people, and some of them look at the Buddha and look at his charisma, being an enlightened person, were very captivated, and they wanted to know who he is. So they asked him, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. The first question that came is, "Are you a god?" Obviously, the Buddha said, "I'm not a god." Yeah. Then they asked him, "Are you a prophet? A prophet Muhammad, a prophet like Jesus Christ is a prophet of God?" The Buddha says, "No, I'm not a prophet." Then, if you are not a god, you are not a prophet. Are you an angel? The Buddha says, "No, I'm not an angel." Then, further question, "Are you a man?" And the Buddha says, "No, I'm not a man." Yeah, a man as like ordinary people. And then people were very puzzled. You're not a god, you're not a prophet, you're not an angel, you're not a man. Then who are you? And this is what the Buddha answered. Yeah, just like a red, blue, or white lotus, born in the water, grown in the water, rising up above the water, stands unsmeared by the water. In the same way, I, the Buddha, born in the world, grown in the world, having overcome the world, live unsmeared by the world. Remember me, Brahman, as awakened. So he called himself the awakened, which is actually the literal meaning of the word Buddha. Buddha, by the way, is not an English word. Buddha is a Sanskrit word. And the literal translation of the word Buddha means to be awakened. Yeah, all of you know that. So this is how he described himself. So he's not a god. He's not he's not a prophet. He's not an angel. He's just born in the world, born into this world. But he transcends. He transcends the mundane, the worldly circumstances, and become what he described himself as the awakened one. So it's very important to understand this part, to make sure that we do not end up elevating the Buddha to heaven, like treating him like the Buddha is up there, which is actually the wrong way to regard the Buddha. Okay, all right, let's go on. Yeah, and then further, this is quoted from the book of the Venerable Insun. Quoted from the book, and he said that when he was studying the Nikayas, in one of the Anguttara Nikayas, it was quoted this: all Buddhas emerge from the human realm. None has ever attained Buddhahood in the heaven realm. Very profound, isn't it? If you go back to the sutras, it has been mentioned that the Sakyamuni Buddha actually is the seventh Buddha in the worldly realm, or in the period of the Buddhas that comes to the world. And all the Buddhas, according to the research into the sutras, say that none of these Buddhas became Buddha up in heaven. No, they became Buddha while they were humans, including the Sakyamuni Buddha, of course. Yeah, the historical Buddha, we call it the historical Buddha that we know from recorded history was born in the human world. So it's very important to start off the discussion of the book with this understanding, that the Buddha was born not elsewhere in the world as a human being, and he became the Buddha in the human world, all right, not up in the heaven. Okay. Now then, Venerable Master Insun then, in being intrigued by the facts that he read in the sutras about the Buddha being born in the human realm, yeah, and became a Buddha in the human realm, then go further investigating into Indian Buddhism with one objective, trying to find out why the Buddhism that we see so often today are quite different from the original teaching. So therefore he went into Indian Buddhism, because Buddhism came from India, so he has to go back to the source. Long period of evolution and distortion through torrents of changing conditions, the original tenets of the Dharma have been diluted and lost. This is one conclusion as a result of his research into Indian Buddhism. Right? This one conclusion. Because of that, to find out the source of Buddhist thoughts, examine the driving force behind their emergence, and to discern the original teaching from extinct scriptures. What he's trying to say here is that, given the fact that Buddhism is different from those of the original teaching of the Buddha, we have to find out why, what circumstances make them different today. Yeah, because the more we understand that, the more we will not become too judgmental. That's why from the very beginning I urge all of you to come with an open mind and not to be judgmental. We are not going to conclude at the end of the day, this is a better school, that is not so better school. This is, we are not going to end up like that. We're going to end up understanding better why certain schools practice certain ways, why certain culture practice certain way. And then with due respect to the way they practice, we individually ourselves will be able to make our own choices. Which school suits you best? Yeah? Which school suits you best and which school you prefer? Yeah? This is the objective, not to be judgmental on other schools. To study what actual benefits they bring to our body and mind, our families and our countries, without being blinded by embellished argumentation. In other words, go back to the basics. At the end of the day, why do we want to come and learn Buddhism? The answer must be to benefit. Yeah, if you don't benefit, then why will we be wasting time? Huh? Coming a few hours every night to come and listen to Dhamma talks, to attend Sutta discovery lessons, to come to Sunday and listen to venerables giving Dhamma talks. Definitely to benefit yourself. So we have to therefore find out what were the original teaching of the Buddha that ultimately will be able to benefit us, minus all the embellished argumentation. Means very artistic, very descriptive, and unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the Chinese culture tend to be a little bit flowery. And sometimes you look at some of the sutras in the Mahayana sutras, especially the Chinese, it has a lot of this embellished argumentation. Yeah, a lot of flowery languages, very idealistic, very visionary, but may not necessarily be easy to follow. And because of that, people get carried away. People have a weakness. Human beings has this particular weakness. They like to sensationalize. Sensationalize. Yeah, feel the feel of being worked up. Yeah, and sometimes when the teaching of the Buddha is so simple, it got overlooked. Yeah, people start to look at some of the very descriptive, very flowery language. Yeah, which works on the sensation, but not necessarily help you to solve our own problem, so to speak. All right, now the next thing the Venerable Master did in his book was to classify Indian Buddhism. Yeah, Indian Buddhism, by the way, spent over a period of 1,700 years, from the day the Buddha was born to the day the Buddha started to propagate, started to teach, until his paranibbana, and then all the way until Buddhism died off in India. By the way, some of you might not know, Buddhism actually disappeared in India. It's very sad, isn't it? I mean, from the country where it originated, it disappeared. Yeah, there are many reasons why Buddhism disappeared from India. Yeah, but 1,700 years of existence, Buddhism. The Venerable classified that period into 5 periods. Yeah? To 5 periods. The first period, obviously, is during the first 500 years. Rather, during the first 300 years, from the time of the Buddha till the first council, second council, the universal goal of liberation with the Sravaka doctrine at the core. The Sravaka doctrine are mainly the Theravadan school. Yeah, Sravaka means you listen, you learn by listening. Yeah, you learn by listening. You listen to, and of course the teaching of the Buddha were the main doctrine. Then the next development is the offshoot of the Sravaka doctrine, inclining towards the Bodhisattva doctrine. There was a movement close about 500 years later, after the death of the Buddha. There's a group that swing towards following the Bodhisattva doctrine, which is inclined towards Mahayana. Yeah, and then the third period was the concurrent dissemination of the Mahayana and Hinayana. You see the word Hinayana again? You see, during the time, the Mahayana looked at the Theravadins as Hinayana, small vehicle. Hina means small. Huh? Maha means big. So they sort of like look down on their... Yeah, I think the reason why they put it that way is because the Mahayana felt that the Theravadins are only caring for themselves, their own salvation. Huh? They only practice for their own salvation to reach Nirvana, but they don't care about other people. And the Mahayana claim that because they are big, Maha means big vehicle, so they want to carry a lot of people with them. But the truth is not like that. If you look at the time of the Buddha, just look at the Buddha himself. Is the Buddha Hinayana? The Buddha is not Hinayana. Buddha is definitely more than Mahayana, because he devoted his whole life making sure that everybody have a chance to get enlightenment. And his disciples, so many of the Buddha's disciples face so much risk, even loss of their life, going around the different part of India to teach the Dhamma. How can you call them small vehicle? Yeah? They are definitely big vehicles, but in those days they have been called small vehicles. So, but during the third period, these two schools, these two groups, concurrently are promoting the Mahayana doctrines. Huh? And then the next development is the offshoot of the Bodhisattva doctrine, inclining towards the Tathagata doctrine. Tathagata means human nature. Not human, Buddha nature, sorry. Buddha nature. Tathagata means the Buddha nature in us. Huh? There's a school that believes that that in each of us we have the Buddha nature. We explain that a little bit later. And then that led to the final development, which is the oneness of the Buddha and the Brahma with the Tathagata doctrine at the core. In other words, the Buddha nature became so strong that eventually the belief was that the Buddha, Brahma, by the way, is the Indian supreme God, yeah? Brahma. That Buddha and the Brahma as if is like oneness. Huh? So that was how Buddhism eventually got into trouble, because this concept, the number 4 and number 5, happened during the time when there was a revival of Hinduism in India. Hinduism became very, very strong. And in order for the Buddhist monks, the teachers then, to attract devotees, they sort of equate the teaching of the Buddha with Hinduism, yeah, and then try to integrate them. That actually causes more problem than good, because that actually accounts for one of the factors for the demise of Buddhism in India. Why Buddhism finally died in India? This is one of the reasons. Because instead of going back to the original teaching of the Buddha and emphasize the uniqueness of Buddhism, the Dhamma, they went and, sort of run parallel to the teaching of. In fact, I read in detail the books. The Hinduism was very smart. During that time, they even came out with the theory that the Buddha was nothing more than one of the reincarnation of the Brahma gods. Yeah, and so therefore, the Buddha is part of Hinduism. Yeah, in fact, if you go to some of the, I was invited some, I think 15, 20 years back when I was still in Singapore, and I was with the, helping the Singapore Buddhist Federation, and they, interreligious gathering. During Vesak Day, I was invited to Ramakrishna Mission in Bartley Road, and they celebrated Vesak Day, and they positioned the Buddha as one of their reincarnated prophets. Yeah. So can you imagine? This is some of the problems that we face, Buddhism faced during that time. So that's enough to understand, the development. Quite complex though. Yeah. Okay. Classification of Indian Buddhism. Now, the Venerable Insun further classified Indian Buddhism into three periods. Just now there was a 5 periods classification. Now he classified them into 3 periods. Early Buddhism, which encompassed the pre-sectarian and the sectarian Buddhism, and then the Mahayana Buddhism, which encompassed early Mahayana and late Mahayana. I will explain that later. And then, which is the 3rd and the 4th period I show you in the earlier slide. And then the last one, exoteric Mahayana Buddhism, which is the 5th period. Exoteric Mahayana Buddhism actually refers to Vajrayana, the Tibetan school, which we will go into it later. All right. Now, also the Venerable Master Insun classified the Indian Mahayana Buddhism. Now we are talking about just Indian Mahayana Buddhism into 3 systems. The early Mahayana is known as the empty nature mere name. This is a very difficult translation. I think they translate from Chinese. But just simply you just remember this. The Nagarana's Madhyamaka school, which is actually referring to the, if you are familiar with the middle path school, yeah, Zhongguan, yeah, the middle school, yeah. This is the early, the one that advocated the concept of emptiness, sunyata, okay. And this is the early Mahayana Buddhism. And by the way, early Mahayana is closely connected in terms of concept to early Buddhism of the Theravadan teaching. In other words, the early teaching of the Buddha was very connected to the early Mahayana, because the early Mahayana actually derived their doctrine and concept from the early teaching of the Buddha. So, if you ask me today, among the Mahayana schools, which one is the closest to Theravada? This is the one, yeah. The middle path school, yeah. The Madhyamaka school, okay. Then comes the late Mahayana, which they call it the delusive discernment mere conscious. It's a consciousness school. Some of you who read Mahayana books or Mahayana Buddhism would understand this. There's a school called the mere consciousness school. All right, this comes from this. It's called Yogacara school. The later part of Mahayana, and then of course later development. Just now I show you the Tathagata, the Buddha Nature School, came out as True Permanence Mere Mind School, Buddha Nature School, and this got to do with the Pure Land School. Yeah, the Pure Land School is based on the Buddha Nature School. Even Zen Buddhism actually is based on this. Yeah, Okay, but it's too complex to go into that. Just remember that there are different schools. And then, of course, the last one, not least, the last one is exoteric Buddhism. Came into existence around 6th, 7th century, which is a later part of the development of Indian Buddhism, which unfortunately correspond to the final period of Indian Buddhism. Because towards that part, and then a few hundred years later, Buddhism disappeared, demise. The practice of the Bodhisattva path for eons of kalpas to attain Buddhahood is just too indirect and slow. There was this thinking during that time that if you were to follow the early Mahayana or the late Mahayana, the other Mahayana schools, which the sutra says, if you want to attain Buddhahood, you have to be a Bodhisattva, you've got to come back, life after life, and then so many kalpas. You know what one kalpa is, right? Is the cycle of the existence, and then the disintegration of the whole world system, So you're talking about don't know how many millions of years. So can you imagine, when you are one of the practitioners, you say, oh boy, how could I become Buddha? It took so long. So someone came up with the easy vehicle. Yeah, the easy vehicle. So that's how this thing evolved, and then it becomes an easy path. So there was this rebirth in the Pure Land and all that, right? Now then, of course, the Vajrayana vehicle came into existence, which is called the diamond vehicle. And Vajra means thunderbolt, lightning, fast. All right? So instant Buddhahood. That was how it evolved, okay? Now, please remember, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm not saying, no judgment, all right? Just understand how it evolved. Because for what we see today in the whole world of Buddhism, it did not come dropping from the sky. It must have come from somewhere. And this book is trying to explain to us, it came because of this development in the history of Buddhism in India. You understand what I mean? Yeah? So it's not judgment, you're not trying to pass judgment or anything. All right? Now, then he further went on to classify the Buddhist doctrines. All right? Now, Venerable Master Insun, as I said earlier on, spent a lot of time reading all the different sutras, the writings, and then went back to as early as possible to research into the early teaching of the Buddha. And obviously, he would not miss any of the Theravadan writings. In the early days, there was this Theravadan, very famous Theravadan monk called Buddha Gosa. He is known to be a Tipitaka master. That means he's an expert, yeah, in all the in the sutras. And in his commentaries of the four major Nikayas of the Theravadan Buddhism, the Nikayas, he classified the Nikayas into four different groups, categories. The first one, the Neha Nikaya, he classified them as the beautifier of excellent blessings. In other words, auspicious and delight. Because the Pali word, Sumangala Vilasini, is translated as the beautifier of excellent blessing. Okay, I will explain that later what it means. But simply said is auspicious and delight. To make you feel good, to make you, auspicious. Delight means you feel good, right? Then, of course, the other Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, is classified as the expeller of confusing thoughts, dispelling of doubts. In other words, this particular Nikaya focus on clarifying your doubts. All right. Then the next Nikaya, the Samyutta Nikaya, which is classified as the lamp of the essence of the meaning. In other words, proclamation of truth. In other words, what he's saying is that in this Nikaya, you can find the real original teaching of the Buddha, the truth, the purest, if I, for lack of a better word, the purest. And then the last Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, is classified as the fulfiller of the wishes, or fulfillment of wishes. Sort of like trying to be the skillful means, trying to make you to appease your request. Yeah. So very interesting how they classify these Nikayas, because during the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha was teaching, he came across many different human disposition, people of different temperaments, people of different backgrounds, people of different intellectual capability. So the Buddha obviously very skillfully used methods to try to make his teaching understood by various different level of people. And I think in that sort of way, the suttas are classified under these categories. Yeah. So now, then what the Venerable Master did was he then equate this classification of the Nikayas by the famous Tipitaka Master Buddhaghosa, and compare it with the classification done by the Mahayana monk, Mahayana Venerable, the Nagarjuna's 4 Siddhanta analysis. And the four Siddhantas means doctrinal objective. If for lack of better words, you can call it expedient means or skillful means, whichever you want to call it. But just understand it as ways to make people understand. The first one is supreme meaning, the perfect and the highest truth. Sometimes in technical terms we call it the first principle. Very direct, right? Second one is the therapeutic, diagnostic treatment. Someone come to the Buddha or someone come to the Venerable with a problem. What the Venerable monk would do is, knowing that the person has a problem, he uses certain part of the teaching to address the particular problem. So that's why it's called therapeutic. The third one is individual adaptation. People with different intellectual ability, so they tailor the teaching and the way of presentation to suit the listener. And the last one is worldly, meaning things that very commonly used. So just like here, sitting here, when I want to explain something, I have to think in terms of terminologies and phrases that you and I can relate. Yeah, if I use terms that are too technical, for example, some of you may not understand. Yeah, so this is quite common. So we talk in terms of a language that both of us can understand. That's what it means. Okay. So what Venerable Master did was, he take the Buddhaghosa's analysis, classification, and then compare it with Nagarjuna's analysis, and there is a parallel. All right, and I'm going to show you. Okay, let me explain the 4 Siddhanta again. The 4 methods of teaching the Buddha. Now, the words are small, but let me read to you. First, the worldly method. I remember I mentioned the worldly method. This entails adapting the teaching of the wishes and desire of the audience. This way, the Buddha can reach the broadest possible audience and teach the Dhamma in a way that most people will listen and understand. It allows for incorporating of local beliefs and applying them to Buddhist beliefs, bending the rules to adapt to local customs, offering the enticement of material benefits in this world or heavens in the next, and offering a wide variety of teaching and practices so that the different tastes of living beings can be catered to. This is a bit like the sales pitch that gets the customer to come into the tent. It is usually the first step in getting one to have faith. So you got it? So the worldly method, the worldly Siddhanta, is a method, skillful means, because someone who comes in contact with the Dhamma, very, very new, know nothing about the teaching of the Buddha. Now, how do you get him into, by the worldly method? And some of the worldly method, I think, today, if you look around, even in Singapore, we have a very good example, because we are unique in the sense that we have all the different schools of Buddhism manifesting here in our society. And some of the methods, some of these different schools of Buddhism use, yeah, very obvious. The worldly method is very common. Huh? Don't worry, you got problem, you come, all right? I throw some water on you, you will be blessed. Yeah, all your problem will go away. Don't worry, you come, you know, you put a joystick, you know, I give you something to chant, you know, some mantras to chant. You go home, you chant this mantra, your problems will go away. Very, very tempting, very attractive, because it's a worldly method. People want shortcuts. People, yeah, and this is very common. Then the second Siddhanta is called the personal or individual method. This entails understanding and people's potential for good spiritual roots and encouraging and developing them. These good spiritual capacities include faith, diligence, presence of mind, mental concentration, and spiritual insight. And the paramattas. Each of us has unique strength. This personal method of teaching involves being able to recognize this in each individual and knowing how to make them blossom to their fullest potential. This is a very good method, yeah, because it's looking at the individual strength. Some people are very faith-driven. So what you do is that you use faith to help him gain confidence. And then later on, of course, you must get him to continue to study the real teaching of the Buddha. But if the person is so weak and he needs faith, yeah, and you're going to try to talk to him about the first principle, it will be very difficult. So this is tailored to the individual. The third one is therapeutic, which I explained earlier on. Person comes with a specific problem, all right, and then you want to create a solution to his problem. This is a therapeutic method. And the last one is a method of the higher significance. Now this is the most important method, but unfortunately, most practitioners use the worldly method, the individual method, the therapeutic method, and then stop short. Never go further. They never go further to the method of the higher significance. This is the one that really will help the practitioner understand the root motivation of the teaching of the Buddha, and being able to then, benefit from the teaching of the Buddha. Having attracted the audience, develop the good spiritual capabilities, and heal their spiritual flaw, the Buddha is ready to reveal the ultimate purpose, yeah, which is the work of enlightenment. This is the path of the Bodhisattva. So, the ultimate method, all right? So just to give you an idea of what the four Siddhantas is. All right, let me draw a simile. This is for me. The others I quote from a book, but this is for me. Let's say a simile to explain the four Siddhantas, expedient means. Let's say a person who led an unhealthy lifestyle, suffered severe obesity, hypertension, high blood sugar, and depression. Well, this is terrible. A lot of problem. So what he does, by the worldly method, first thing he going to look for the best doctor for treatment, medication, or anybody who can prescribe him magical medicine or miracle cure. People who are in that state of health, very desperate, and you tell him, look, I bring you to this place where you can drink the water from the river, you get cured. He will believe you because he's desperate, no choice. So the worldly method is somewhat like that, when the person is in that state of problem. Then come along a virtuous friend who knew his craving for food, taught him healthy culinary skill, so he has more control over his diet and eat more home-cooked food rather than all the time hawker center. All right. Now, this fella is using the therapeutic method because he knew this fella, he loved food. So you don't want to talk to him any other things. Start from the food, yeah? All right. So next he helped enroll him into weight management course to understand the source of his obesity and his health risk, and got him interested in regular physical exercise. So the next step, individual, yeah. Now you get him to now that he solve his the second one was the individual because you tailor to his craving for food. Now you go into the therapeutic mode, yeah, therapeutic, really going into getting him to understand the source of the problem. And finally got him to commit to a complete change of lifestyle. Quit smoking, alcohol, switch to a healthier vegetarian diet, exercise regularly, slow down his pace of life, and practice daily meditation for relaxation. This is the first principle, the higher significance. So I'm giving you this simile to explain the four siddhantas in a very mundane terms, so that you can relate, what in your mind, what the four siddhantas means. Then only after you go through all this process, you realize that his health is in his own hands, his lifestyle. Yeah. So this is the significance of the four siddhantas. Using this simile as an example, hopefully you understand the meaning. All right. Now, let me give you some examples of siddhanta, expedient means, over the period of Buddhism, the history of Buddhism. Yeah. By the way, many of you might not know that the first Buddha statue that ever appeared in this world is 500 years after the Buddha has passed on. During the time of the Buddha, till the time the Buddha passed on, until 500 years later, there were no Buddha statues at all. The first Buddha statue came into existence 1st century AD, 600 years after the paranirvana of the Buddha. And it came into existence because of the Mahayana school. During that time, there were this very strong, sensational urge to recall the virtues of the Buddha, to remember the Buddha. And therefore, someone came up with the idea of, and the first Buddha statue, early Buddha statues were found in Greece, This is the Greco arts, called Gandhara Buddha, was found in Greece. Buddhism went as far as Greece, by the way. And this was if you look at the robes, it's very, very Roman type, isn't it? Yeah. So this is actually a Buddha found in Greece, and the Buddha statue, found in the. So those were the Buddhas. How the Buddha statue came into being. Then later on, they were introduced chanting of the Buddha's name was offered. The chanting of the Buddha's name was offered because in those days, devotees travel, in ancient India. They go to places that has a lot of wild animals, very rough terrains, and diseases, bandits, robbers, and all that. And some of the devotees were very frightened. And the Buddha, in order to help them, to give them confidence, said that, look, if you're in that sort of situation, just chant my name. Chant the name of the Buddha. That was the intention. Yeah? That was the intention. These are good expedient means. These are good siddhanta. Then comes later on Jataka tales. I'm sure you all know the Jataka stories, the past lives of the Buddha. And these past lives of the Buddha was actually presented as to instill the Bodhisattva spirit of the Buddha, the 6 paramatters, the perfection of the Buddha's qualities, so as to inspire the disciples to practice perfection. So that's how the Jataka story comes about. Yeah. So the reason why I mention all this is because we are not in a position to argue whether these stories are true or not true. We are not in a position. Yeah, nobody can. But at least we know why those stories came about. Okay? There's a purpose, good purpose for it. That's what I'm trying to say. All right? Now, another example of, more examples of expedient means 6 kinds of recollection during the time of the Buddha, and later on the development of the different schools. To recollect the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the morality, generosity, and the heavenly realm. Yeah, the later development of these different schools. For those who are strong in faith but weak in wisdom, because people need this sort of thing, And then in remembrance of the Buddha, stupas were erected to house the Buddha's relics, the relics of the Buddha. Then comes later on rituals. So what I'm trying to point out here is that during the early part of the teaching of the Buddha, original Buddhism, when the Buddha was around, there were no rituals. Rituals of making offerings and prostration towards the stupa and Buddha statue. Now again, no judgment. We are not saying it's good or bad, right or wrong, but this expedient means. These are good things that can be practiced. Yeah, but always remember that there is a reason for those practices. Homage, repentance, supplication means saying prayers. Yeah, oh Lord, may I be granted this, that sort of thing. Supplication. Rejoicing and transferring of one's merit towards others. These were introduced subsequently. Not during the time of the Buddha, subsequently. Visualization of the Buddha in one's body as a Buddha. All these were introduced much later. And then evolved into reading, reciting, copying, prostrating, and donating the scriptures. You remember now, you see out there, in very common among the Mahayana temples, they always say that, if you print the sutras, and you print a lot of them and you distribute, you get merits and all that. Actually, the idea came from there, And then also there's a belief that you don't have to do anything. You just put the sutra on your altar. You prostrate. Every day you prostrate to the sutras, and you get a lot of merits. It came from there. So what I'm trying to say is that the practices that we see today, so obvious in the Buddhist community, did not come from nowhere. It came from the early days. Chanting of sutras and recitation of the mantras is quite common. All right, now I give another simile to describe the dilution of the Dhamma because of different ethnic culture. Over the 2,000 years of history of Buddhism, due to different time and space. Pure original cow milk from Buddhigaya. That's where the Buddha was enlightened. All right, assuming the original cow milk came from there. Sweeteners and flavor added to tailor the taste of the locals in the country where the milk was imported. Assuming the milk got imported into China. And assuming the Chinese were not very used to the cow milk. Someone added sweetener, different flavor, that the Chinese can, all right, so to adapt to the local taste, Then it became popular. So what happened when popularity increased demand? So the initial mix was further diluted with additive to cope with the volume of the demand. Then the original purity of the milk was further diluted. This is an example of cultural, different cultures introducing different local ethnic practices into the practice of Buddhism. And then because they focus so much on the local practices, the local culture, the cultural content, they forgot about the original teaching of the Buddha. So it's diluted. And worst of all, with changing time, new variations in recipes were introduced to offer new flavors. There's a spelling mistake here. Flavors to cater to a new generation. It's somewhat like if I can draw an analogy, it's somewhat like some of us we are very nostalgic. We remember, especially for me, having been a senior now. I remember some of the good local food in the old days, 50, 60 years ago. You can't find them anymore because the person who prepared those food no longer exists. They pass on. The younger generation do not learn the techniques. Some learn the techniques, but they modify it because they want to make quick money. So end up with fast food, right? So the same thing, the old flavor, the original, in Chinese they call 老字牌, 老字号, the old names disappeared. So what you saw now is you see some of the hawker centers, they have the hawker store, they have the name of the old store, but the preparation, the recipes, the method of cooking is completely different. What is the consequences? Not the same. Not the same. So if you're nostalgic, you go back and think of the old flavor. Not there. Same thing can happen to the Dhamma. Same thing happened to the Dhamma. Okay? All right? Now, the Venerable Master, in Suan, also correlate the historical period of Indian Buddhism with the four Siddhantas. All right? Early Buddhism, he correlate this, the early Buddhism, which is the Samyutta Nikaya, he correlate that to be the proclamation of truth. And this is the reason why at the end of the book, the conclusion is, though he is a Mahayana monk, he advocated and he appealed to all Mahayana practitioners to go back and study the Nikayas, the Theravada Nikaya, especially the Samyutta Nikaya, because to him, contained in this Nikaya is the original teaching of the Buddha. Yeah, the pure original teaching of the Buddha. And then early Mahayana, which is the Madhyamaka school, corresponds to the therapeutic Siddhanta, which is the dispelling of doubts. So he also felt that, if you really study this Samyutta Nikaya and the teaching in the Mahayana, the early Mahayana, you are able to actually integrate the two strengths together. And these are the two most important elements if you really want to understand the root motivation of the Buddha. Then the later Mahayana, the mere consciousness, and the Tathagata Gaba school correspond to the individually adapted Siddhanta of fulfillment of wishes. He considered the later part of the Mahayana as skillful means to satisfy the wishes of the devotees, yeah, but not necessarily contain the essence of the Buddha's teaching, but also not necessary to say that they are not Buddhism. They are still Buddhism, but a different level. All right. And then the last one, not least, is the esoteric Mahayana, which correspond to the worldly Siddhanta, or auspicious and delight. It is comparing the practice of Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana. A lot of the practices are more towards using the worldly expedient means, yeah, as a way to help the devotees. Okay. Yeah, the parallel of the historical method of Indian Buddhism and human lifespan. He compared the period of Indian Buddhism like human lifespan. No? Early Buddhism is like childhood simplicity and purity. When you are a child, you are very pure, you are innocent. Yeah, very pure. All right? And simple. And then early Mahayana is like young adults' vitality, with adulthood's idealism and vision. Late and esoteric Mahayana, you aging, become old, a sense of hollowness, the search for eternal youth, and reliance on an external force, idealized and faith-driven, led to self-centeredness in the easy path. See, when you grow old, you worry if you don't have the Dhamma understanding, and the Dhamma, a clear understanding of the Dhamma, you become very frightened of death, and all you want is, what happened to me after I die, after death? So if someone comes along and say, don't worry, you just do this, you go to heaven. You don't worry, you do this, you get eternal life. That's why a lot of old people are easily attracted to theistic religion that has a supreme God, yeah, because of this psychological problem, yeah, if they are not Dhamma practitioner. All right, so he actually drew a parallel, yeah, and this is how Buddhism disappeared in India, because towards the last part, it was all like that. All right, deification of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas. The Buddha was idealized and elevated from a human being to heaven, and that's why in the Mahayana Sutras you have the so-called ancient Buddhas. And because they place the Buddha up to the heavenly level, no more the historical Buddha anymore. And then you find that in the Mahayana practices, there are many bodhisattvas that were created because of the need, because of the Siddhantas, all right? Example is this: the synthesis of Sariputra and deity Brahma created the Bodhisattva Manjusri. Now, the Theravadian knows that Sariputra is is one of the Buddha's disciple, the one that has a lot of wisdom, yeah, the one that has the most wisdom. And in the Mahayana school, they have the Manjusri Bodhisattva. But Manjusri Bodhisattva does not exist in historical record. But Sariputra, Venerable Sariputra, did exist in historical record because he was known as a disciple of the Buddha. So where did the Manjusri Bodhisattva came from? It came from the synthesis of Sariputra and the deity Brahma, and then they created this Bodhisattva Manjusri. That is Venerable Insun's analysis, okay? Synthesis of, this, one of the disciples of the Buddha, Magarayana, and the deity Sakra Devanan, Indra, created the Bodhisattva Samattabhadra, which is also one of the 4 major Bodhisattva of the Mahayana school. And then even, the Kuan Yin Bodhisattva, which is Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, which is actually the personification of the great compassion of the Buddha. Yeah. So is the great vow of the Buddha personified as Siddhigarbha, Ticangwang Pusa. See, the 4 main Bodhisattva in Mahayana did not come from nowhere. That's what I'm trying to say. It came from some source. And this is the reason why it came about. Okay? Again, please remember, no judgment, not whether they are false or true, wrong or not true. No. It's because during the time, the period of the spread of Buddhism, there was this need to create this sort of personification. And that's how it happened, okay? All right? All the 4 great Mahayana Bodhisattvas are nothing more than the personification of the virtues of the Buddha, the virtues of the historical Buddha. Great compassion, great wisdom, great vow, great conduct. Okay? Now, we come to the conclusion. Welcome the Buddha from heaven back to our world. Dhamma is all about how a human being aspires to the practice of Bodhisattva deeds, and through the perfection of such deeds attains Buddhahood. Unification of the Dhamma and Vinaya. You need a delicate balance. You have the Dhamma, you must also have Vinaya. Otherwise, it's very difficult for a practitioner. But then too much Vinaya, out of context of the Dhamma, is also not good. Then you are restricted. Yeah? Integration of the teaching of dependent origination and the nature of emptiness, sunyata. Now this is a call for integrating the early Mahayana teaching and the Theravada teaching, integrating them into one. Integrating the benefit of self and benefit others, adaptation to modern trends. The focus should be on the youth, social engagement, collectivism. Collectivism means, organize. There must be organization. Otherwise, it's very difficult to push ahead with Buddhist movement. Practice according to the core teachings with confidence and vow, loving kindness and compassion and wisdom. This is extracted from this book. All right, now, in conclusion, back to the simplicity, true to life, practical and attainable original teaching of the Buddha. What Venerable Insun is calling for is that all Buddhist practitioners should ground themselves in the purity and simplicity of the original teaching of the Buddha in early Buddhism, which is mainly the Samyutta Nikaya, so as to build a solid foundation of right views. The understanding of dependent origination is so crucial, because only understanding that can allow you to establish a very good foundation of the Dhamma, all right, the right view. Practice with the inspiration of the Bodhicitta spirit of early Mahayana and the wisdom of Sunata, rooted in dependent origination. So in other words, don't stop there. He's urging that if you are practicing Buddhist, don't stop there. Go further and look into the inspiration of the Bodhicitta spirit of early Mahayana. In other words, do not be just be contented with meditating in a cave. Yeah, if you have accomplished some level of Dhamma realization, you should come back to society and serve society, spread the words, share with other people. So that's the Mahayana spirit. Yeah, adapting expedient means of the later Mahayana appropriately to time, space, and circumstances. Now, the later Mahayana, although may have practices that are seemingly not so in line with the original teaching of the Buddha, but they are not completely useless. But let me give you an example. Chanting of the Buddha's name. Yeah, the Pure Land School advocated the chanting of the name Amitabha. It's not useless. It is not something that is not in line with Buddhism, but it is a means, because some people need that. So you can adapt expedient means of the later Mahayana appropriately to some of these people. I quoted an example. You know, if you have our older generation, my mom, for example, you know, if she is 89 years old and she is illiterate, how are you going to teach him Dhamma? Very difficult. So, but you want to give him some spirituality. So you ask him to chant the name of the Buddha. You know what I mean? So it's not some of the practices. We are not making any judgment whether they are right or wrong. But once you understand where it come from, how it evolved, you know, to those practice, it will help you to make your own decision. All right. So, all right now. In conclusion, he advocated that human-centered uniqueness of the Dhamma must be upheld, and we must guard against the slippery slope of expedient means. Slippery slope means is, once you get used to the easy way out, you then go down the slippery slope. You go, and then you go down. Instead of going up, you go down. But when you are in the spiritual, when you are in spiritual development, you want to go up, you don't want to go down. But the problem is that some of these skillful means, some of these expedient means are so tempting, you know. So you're stuck there. You're stuck there. And once you're stuck there, worst of all, you go down the slippery slope and you never progress. So that's what Venerable Master In Shun is trying to say. Not the human-centered Buddhism that he's advocating is not the popularly branded humanistic Buddhism that we see so common nowadays, which are more towards appeasing the worldly desires and fulfilling the mundane wishes of devotees. Yeah, if you go and see some of the practices, they call themselves humanistic Buddhism, but they practice a lot of rituals that actually has nothing to do with the teaching of the Buddha. It's more Chinese culture, a lot of them. Like one of the very common rituals that they do in many parts of the Chinese world, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, is the offering to celestial beings. 拜天, yeah, big thing, you know, and then they do big rituals, you know. That sort of thing got nothing to do with Buddhism. But we are not commenting